Hello and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. Imagine that one day you wake up and everything feels really heavy. The morning light filters through the curtains, but it fails to brighten your mood. You've felt this way before, but today it's particularly overwhelming. It's as if an invisible weight is pressing down on your chest, making it hard for you to breathe. You get out of bed, but every step feels like you're wading through really thick mud. You get ready for work, plastering a forced smile on your face. You've gotten pretty good at pretending, actually. Your friends, your family, and your colleagues, they all see you as someone who's got it all together, but inside, there's a storm brewing inside you. It's not always visible, but it is always there, lurking just beneath the surface. The day progresses and you find yourself snapping unexpectedly at a colleague for a really minor mistake that they've made. It may not even be a mistake. They may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. And immediately you get this sense of guilt that washes over you, which actually makes you feel even worse than before because now you know that it's definitely your fault. This isn't the person that you are or the one that you want to be. But is it? Is this actually who you are? Is this who you've become? Later, after work, you actually avoid a friend's invitation to go out for coffee or a drink because you tell them that you have more work to do at home and that's your excuse. But the truth is, in reality, that you just don't have the energy to engage anymore, to pretend anymore. You want to be able to go home and take off the mask and just be yourself. And as the day comes to an end, you're exhausted, emotionally, mentally, and physically. You collapse onto the sofa or couch, depending on who you are. And that's when you start thinking, why is it that you can't be happy? Why do you always feel as though you're not good enough? The questions swirl around in your mind, feeding into the darkness that seems to consume you. Alternatively, you might not think about it at all. You might cover it with layers of other things. Maybe you don't really understand how you feel, but you remain positive or you do your best to try to remain positive in the hopes that you can fake it till you make it, and one day that happiness will begin to shine through. But you know what? It never does shine through. You've been trying this your entire life and it just doesn't seem to be working. Instead, you end up feeding your emotions or, living on junk food or binging TV for hours or hiding away and not going out, or maybe even doing things like gambling or smoking or, using sex or drugs or something as a crutch. There are 100 different things that you can do to pretend that life isn't consumed with this underlying knowledge that you have inside you that something isn't quite right. And that wonderful life that you see other people having isn't available to you somehow. This is your shadow self speaking to you, the part of you that you've been trying really hard to ignore your entire life, to bury deep down inside you. It holds all your unresolved pain, the trauma that you've experienced in your life, that you've endured, but you've never really healed from. Perhaps it was a childhood that was marked by neglect or a relationship that ended in betrayal. These experiences from your past have left scars, and your shadow self has become a repository for all of the emotions you couldn't deal with at the time. That anger that flares up unexpectedly, the overwhelming sadness that you might feel, a constant feeling of inadequacy or helplessness, these are all manifestations of your unacknowledged pain. It's a very real thing. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's a real thing, and it influences your life. If this sounds at all familiar to you, then you may also be feeling that today in particular, these modern times, it's becoming more and more difficult to raise yourself out of this shadow. Because there are things happening now that are even more powerful than when we were children. Society is reinforcing these shadows every single day, reinforcing the trauma that causes these shadows every day. Let's take a look at an example, a really obvious example of how this is happening in our lives right now. It does in some way affect every person. So let's close our eyes and imagine for a moment that we live in the current world. It's a society that's filled with negative messaging. It's constantly being reinforced. Everywhere you turn, you encounter things like political infighting, negative body images, gender biases, messages of racial discrimination, rigid hierarchies, inequality of all types, and a real lack of transparency. This is a constant struggle for recognition and fairness that chips away at your self-esteem, feeding into your shadow self, and its belief that you're not good enough. The external turmoil seeps into your psyche, reinforcing your shadow self and that narrative that the world is unjust and you're helpless to be able to change it. In this environment, your shadow self has a tendency to grow stronger and stronger. You end up with a massive shadow, a bit like that big storm cloud that used to follow the monsters around in their car wherever they would go. You remember the monsters? They had their own personal storm cloud, and the shadow self is a bit like that storm cloud that follows you around. It's shaped by the barrage of negativity, the societal messages that tell you that you're not good enough, not deserving, and not valued. And also, when you witness the injustices of the world, it reinforces that even more. Those external influences fuel your internal struggles, making it really hard to break free from that shadow that clouds your mind. And then think about other people who also appear to have a shadow self. You can recognize those people. Think about that person in your life that you know. It might be a work colleague, it might be a family member, it might be a neighbor or a friend. They always appear to be serene and calm and perfect. But then every now and then they experience this massive explosion, this complete breakdown. You know what that is? That's the shadow self. They've been holding on and gritting their teeth and trying really hard, white-knuckling their way through that shadow self. But every now and then it peeks through, and when it does, it's generally quite catastrophic. So what exactly is the shadow self? Well, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow self as part of his broader theory of analytical psychology. Analytical psychology focuses on the exploration of the unconscious mind, the collective unconscious, and archetypes. Carl Jung believed that if we integrate these different aspects of the self and look at them individually and also collectively, it helps us to achieve personal, relationship, cultural, and societal balance and harmony. The shadow self is the aspect of psychology that represents the unconscious parts of our personality that we often repress or deny because they are deemed unacceptable or undesirable. These hidden aspects can include negative emotions, desires, and traits that we don't want to acknowledge. So say, for example, a person that never allows themselves to express anger in any way. Instead, they bury it and they go home and they ferment over their resentment, but they never express them to the outside world. They are building through feeding this denial of themselves. They're building their shadow self, and it looms like a storm cloud over their life as time goes on, and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger with every unexpressed anger. So according to Carl Jung, everyone has a shadow, absolutely everybody, a shadow self. And And how we deal with our shadow self will determine the quality of our life and our destiny, our ability to control our destiny. Carl Jung actually has a famous saying that goes like this. It says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So what this says is that until you take control of your shadow self, it will control you, and you will allow it to do so, considering it to be fate, something that is outside of your control, when in fact it is within your control to be able to manage it. So failing to take care of your shadow self, failing to do the shadow work and to deal with your shadow self will actually cause those same feelings that you've been hiding from to become the ruler of your life in some way. It is continuously being developed, the shadow self. It never dies. Every experience that we have is sort of karmic in nature, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail in a moment. But it's sort of karmic in nature. Every experience carries karmic energy. And anything that is carrying a negative type of karmic energy is going to sit, if it remains unresolved, in the shadow, building it and making it stronger. It's about as real a concept of us as anything else is, even though you can't physically see it. So the types of experiences that the shadow self tends to build from are things like experiences arising from childhood or family interactions, also experiences with relationships with other people. They might be based on cultural norms as well. So, for example, things like Catholic guilt is a phrase that I hear a lot. Well, that is a shadow, that's the development of a shadow self, this sense of guilt. And of course, Catholicism is not the only thing. It appears in all kinds of cultures. This element of guilt can be contributing to a shadow, the building of a shadow self. And also it can be the response to societal factors as well. You know, this element of unfairness that we see, inequality, the harsh treatment of people, suffering, negativity, the game playing that takes place in politics, and also the cruelty that takes place in social media and also other areas of life as well. The shadow self is basically that part of ourselves that we have dealt with, or let's just say not dealt with adequately, but we've responded to in one of three very unhealthy ways. We've either repressed it, which means that our mind has had an automatic response to a traumatic experience. The trauma may be minor or major, it doesn't really matter, but our mind has kind of shut down and automatically or unconsciously removed the memory or filed it away so deep inside us that we might not actually think about it again, because our mind considers that trauma incident to be too hurtful or too sad or too traumatic and so much better to just be forgotten about altogether. When you repress the memory of a trauma, it isn't really forgotten. Your mind is telling you that it's going to put it away so deep somewhere that you forget it, except it's not forgotten. It's just like a lingering, invisible gas that, despite having no detectable odor, is still causing harm with every single breath. The other way that you can respond to trauma, and in a way that represents the shadow, is through suppression. And this is when you pretend that it doesn't exist. You actively file it away. Like how I described at the top of the show when I was talking about how you kind of fake it till you make it. You put a false smile on. You pretend that everything's okay when in fact it's not. When you're feeling low, but you're pretending that you don't. That's the suppression of your real feelings. Perhaps you do that because you can't explain your feelings, or you feel ashamed of how you feel, or you just want it to be easier not to have to explain anything to people. And you just want to appear for pride purposes as though everything's okay, rather than admit that it's not. It makes you feel like less of a person if you're anything other than perfect. And you're maybe fearful that you'll be judged or something. This kind of suppression is a really common trait for social media influencers, for example. You know, when we watch social media, many of the most influential people on social media, they present a beautiful cinematography. They wear lovely clothes. They've got perfect makeup. They're gorgeous. And they have these concisely written scripts that have taken out all of the ums and the ahs and any weird grunting or laughing sounds that they make, or anything like their dog coming in and plonking down in the middle of a sentence, you know, and they're very short and to the point, and they appear so perfect. One thing I can guarantee you, and that is the more perfect a person appears to be, and that includes any kind of media personality, the more of a performance they're putting on. And they are probably putting it on to avoid displaying the truth. It takes an awful lot of work to be perfect. And if you are achieving perfection, it's probably because you are covering or masking a tremendous shadow. There is a perfect example of this, and I did some tarot readings about a couple during an incident that took place a few years ago. And this was the couple, Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. They were a young couple who were exploring the national parks of the US in their white utility van, I think it was. And Gabby Petito was starting a new social media enterprise where they were going to be talking about their van life. And she was trying to portray them as having the ideal life of being close to nature with no responsibilities, and they're tremendously in love and haven't got a care in the world. And everything was beautiful until one day Brian killed Gabby. And it all ended up getting exposed to the world on television, all the way around the world. We were hearing about it over here in Australia as well. That was a very distinct case of suppressed shadow self. It may have actually been the case for quite a number of characters in that story. I got to know the case really well as it was happening, because I was interested in the case like so many other millions of people were. And I was doing tarot readings, dynamic tarot readings throughout the time that Gabby was missing, and then also when her body was found, and then when Brian went missing, and then when Brian's family were under scrutiny. And I did readings about her disappearance, about their relationship, about the dynamic between Brian and his parents, and trying to explain or discover and explore what could be happening there. And the cards were uncanny, because throughout these readings, they were speaking of the shadows that existed everywhere in that dynamic. Inside Gabby, inside Brian, inside Brian's family. And actually, tarot is a really wonderful tool for helping to identify and help resolve the shadow self in a healthy way, which is something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in this show. I'll also link the playlist to my Gabby Petito case readings because it's a really great example if you are interested in how a person can use tarot to examine the shadow self. And then, of course, there is a third way that people can deal with their shadow self, and that is through expression. Expression can be positive and it can also be negative. And generally, if it's an expression that's based on unresolved trauma that still exists, then the way in which it's going to be expressed is generally negative. This would be affecting things like emotional decision making. It might cause enmeshment issues, passive aggression, overt aggression, things like people-pleasing behaviors, self-doubt, fear, and anxiety. And also through self-punishing behaviors as well, like smoking and drinking and sex addiction, gambling, self-harm, maybe even attraction to abusive people and relationships, and even going so far as suicide. You name it. People have tons of ways of coping and expressing in unhealthy ways their unresolved trauma. And it's important to note also that when it comes to the shadow self, we are never at the finish line. The shadow self is constantly being developed with every new experience that we have in our lives, particularly when it comes to things that hurt us, that we hide away because we just want to be adults about it. And so we hide it in our shadow. So you might be saying to yourself, yes, I have a shadow self that is the result of past trauma, from family to society, from a broken heart maybe, or even because of something mean that some kid once said to me in a playground 100 years ago. But that's who I am, and I'm not going to change now. Okay. So what if you let things stay the way they are? What can you expect down the line? I think I've kind of given you a clue, but let's look at some of the risks of failing to address the shadow self. The first risk is emotional turmoil. And basically what this means is that when your emotions go unresolved, they increasingly lead to things like chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. But it can also mean that you kind of become habitually engaged in chaos or emotional turmoil of some kind, which keeps perpetuating the stress and the anxiety and the depression. The second risk relates to self-sabotage. When you have hidden negative beliefs inside you or about yourself, you often betray yourself, and you betray those secrets by behaving in ways that undermine your own efforts to be successful. And a really obvious example of that is someone who doesn't feel that they deserve to be in a healthy relationship. And so they seek out a healthy relationship, but as soon as that relationship begins to settle into something that has a routine and continuity and begins to feel safe, they will cheat or they will pick fights. And this is them not realizing that they will find issue with the smallest little thing. And that's because they're self-sabotaging their own ability to find happiness in relationships, because their shadow is ruling their thinking and is convincing them, even though they may not be aware of that they are not worthy of a wonderful, healthy relationship. And of course, that leads to the third risk, which is the risk associated with relationships. We all know people in our lives who just can't seem to be in the presence of any other living being without creating some kind of drama and conflict. Commonly, these people are actually feeling the effects of living with unresolved trauma. It causes them to respond emotionally or even irrationally to everything that occurs in the presence of others that might subliminally remind them of their past trauma. And it means that their relationships are often strained and the people around them aren't really sure how to respond to them. They may be always walking on eggshells in their company. They don't know how to safely exist in their presence. And they may also do strange things, like they might seek out people that they consider to be worthy of friendship, put them up on a pedestal, and then become surprised when the person isn't as perfect as they say, and almost respond as though they've been re-traumatized by the lack of perfection of this person that they have been idolizing by placing them on this unrealistic kind of pedestal. So there's all kinds of behaviors. And then finally, the fourth risk that can result from a failure to resolve past traumas that impact your life is stunted personal growth. When you ignore your shadow self, you also end up ignoring what stands in the way of achieving your true potential. Your shadow self could be standing in that pathway, and what you deserve in life is behind it, but you can't find it because your shadow keeps getting in the way. And so, of course, that in turn locks down your ability of whether or not you're able to live a fulfilling life to the degree that you were deserved of. I mentioned karma as it relates to reincarnation and also the current life. And I thought that I've talked about karma in quite a bit of detail in a previous episode here on the show, but I thought that I might just sort of remind us of the types of karma that exist and how karma and the current life, but also reincarnation of previous and future lives, links to the shadow self. So there are 4 different types of karma which originate from Hindu teachings. The first one is Sanchita karma. Sanchita karma is the accumulated karma from all of our past lives. It's like a storing facility of all of our actions, whether they be good or bad actions, that have yet to bear fruit. So Sanchita karma is the karma in waiting, and it's sitting in the storage facility. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be from the past, past lives, from the past of our current life, and it's all waiting to become reconciled in some way. In the case of Sanchita karma, past life experiences such as betrayal or neglect are stored in the subconscious, in the unconscious, and manifest as deep-seated fears and insecurities in your shadow self. So you've heard about people who do, or perhaps you've done past life regression. One of the concepts of around past life regression is that you get to go into previous lives to find out where trauma or experiences have occurred that could explain the shadows within your current life. That's exactly where Sanchita karma comes into play. The next kind of karma is Prarabdha karma. And Prarabdha karma is a portion of Sanchita karma that is currently being experienced in this life. So it was sitting in the storage facility, and now it's being brought out to express itself in your current life. It's the karma that has ripened, if you consider it as being fruit, and it's ready to be dealt with. And it influences your present circumstances. So in the case of Prarabdha karma, current life circumstances like a difficult childhood influence your present behavior and emotional responses, contributing to shadow traits like anger or resentment. So the Prarabdha karma is like the actions of the past ripening into experiences of the current life. And those experiences shape your emotional responses in the continuation of your life, unless they've been resolved. And that's where people who kind of live to become resentful or angry are getting that energy from. The third type of karma is Kriyamana karma. And Kriyamana karma. And this is also known as instant karma. I think I'll call it instant karma. The instant karma is what you are currently doing that will come back one day. It can either come back immediately or it can come back later, but it's based on your current actions. In the case of this instant karma, immediate reactions to situations such as lashing out at someone can create negative emotions that accumulate in your shadow self and reinforce harmful patterns. And then the fourth and final type of karma is Agami karma. And this is the future karma that you will create based on your current actions. It's the karma that will bear fruit in a future life. In the case of agami karma, future actions based on unresolved issues may lead to repeating harmful behaviors, perpetuating the cycle of shadow traits and preventing personal growth. The Sanchita karma of the past is what you might find when you undertake a hypnotic regression in this life. But the agami karma is what you are creating now, that you may have to have a hypnotic regression in your next life in order to discover. So everything has a cumulative effect, and it all sits within the shadow self. So the shadow self, regardless of how many lives you lead, it can never be avoided. It always exists. And therefore, it's really important to know how to integrate that shadow self into your life in a really healthy way. When you're able to do that, it allows you to use the karmic lessons that are learned from the past as a powerful source of positive energy that can help to shape the present and the future in your current life, but also in future lives. So I was looking at ways to be able to articulate a small number of steps of how to integrate your shadow self. And I found a number of sources that talk about 4 steps, but I think there actually are 5 steps to be able to integrate your shadow self in really, really positive ways. And by integrating, what this means is that you're acknowledging that your shadow self exists and you are using it in a way that's going to add positively to your life rather than hiding from it so that it actually has a negative impact behind the shadows. So the very first step is to decide about what kind of aspect of your life you are having issues with, because your shadows are multifaceted and there may be a number of different things that you need to examine. So just pick something about yourself that you feel is a compensation for something. I mean, do you have fears? Do you have confidence issues? Are you hibernating from others? Are you compensating for something with unhealthy habits? Or do you have those unhealthy habits and you don't know whether you're compensating in some way? What is an example of something in your life that you know you need to deal with? It might be anything. It might even be an unhealthy relationship or a resentment about something that is going on right now in your life. So that's step 1. Identify something that needs to be dealt with that sits within you. So, for example, in terms of the resentment, you can't do anything about the issue that's causing you resentment, but you can do something about the resentment. That's within your area of control. So once you've identified the issue that you need to deal with and that aspect of your life that you want to work on, then the next step is really simple. You need to just invite that aspect of your life in. You have to open the door to being able to examine it. Hiding from it and avoiding it and denying it means that it's not going to be dealt with. It's just going to perpetuate. Sugarcoating it will have the same impact. And placing blame on others, projecting it and saying, well, the reason why I feel like this is because that person something, that's not going to resolve it either. The only way that you can get into step 2 of this process is to just ask whatever it is to come in and take a seat because you want to have a chat. And that's basically it. And invite it in and acknowledge that it's real. This is a little bit like step 1 of a 12-step program. You acknowledge that there's an issue there and you accept it for the fact that it exists. And that's basically it. That's the very first thing you need to do, is you need to acknowledge that the issue exists and then commit yourself to being open to inviting it into your life for examination and discussion. So once you've done that, and that can sometimes be really hard, the next step, step 3, is to go back in time. Back to a time when you know that this aspect of your life made one of its earliest appearances. I'm going to give you, and potentially its earliest appearance, I'm going to give you an example from my own life. I discovered this kind of by accident through hypnosis, but it was kind of a catalyst to me knowing to look at the past in order to understand the present. And so I'll use it as my example. When I was really young, I had confidence issues. I was very self-conscious, and I also suppressed my feelings of fear and anger so that I was often looking as though I was okay with stuff when in fact I really wasn't okay. And people never really knew what I was thinking. I would do weird compensatory things. So if somebody at work upset me, I would act as though I'm unaffected, but then I'd just quit my job. I wouldn't go back the next day, and that was it, because I wouldn't have to deal with returning to the scene of the crime the next day. And so I guess you could call it acting out. I might send a fax saying, oh, have a lovely day, but I quit, I'm not coming back, or something like that. Was when I was quite young. And it came across as being irresponsible, but it wasn't. What it was something may have happened at work, but I was dealing with confidence issues. I was dealing with fear of some kind, and I didn't want to appear vulnerable to the point where the person knew that they had hurt my feelings or that I'd been affected. And so I would act normal. I would finish the day. I would go home, but then I would never come back. And I'd use all kinds of excuses. Someone died, or I had jury service, or I was sick, or I was dead, or I got another job, or it didn't really matter. And I would do the same kind of thing in relationships as well. If I had a fight with my boyfriend, I would just dump my boyfriend. There was no way to resolve the issue. So because I didn't want to argue, the arguing was causing me pain. It was putting me at risk of hearing something unpleasant, being treated unpleasantly. And so if I saw a risk of that, then in the fight, then I'd just get rid of the risk, which was the boyfriend. And I didn't even know that this was an issue. I thought this was me being, tough, self-sufficient, confident, when in fact it was demonstrating the exact opposite. One day, now this was, early 20s, who knows, something like that, but even teenage years, during those formative years anyway. One day I sat down with a hypnotist with regards to something entirely unrelated. I wanted to give up smoking. This was a really long time ago. Okay, I haven't smoked in absolute decades. For many, I'd say my lungs are 100% healed by now, and I haven't smoked for many, many decades. Oh, at least 30 years, maybe more. But back then, I was trying to quit. And I didn't quit because of the hypnosis, by the way. I ended up quitting because I got a dog. And I didn't want the dog to inhale the smoke, so I never had another cigarette. Simple as that. But I did go to see the hypnotist about the smoking. It was unsuccessful, but it was successful in another way. She was a marvel when it came to getting me to look back. And that's the reason why I'm mentioning the hypnosis. It took the hypnotist about 6 seconds to get me to realize something that had happened when I was very, very young. And I don't know whether it had anything to do with the smoking, but it was something very crucial to my life, apparently. And I was so young that the mind boggles, and I'm really surprised to think that I had any feelings about it at all. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, my parents were working really hard to start a business and to build that business. And so they would leave me at my grandparents' house during the week while they were working long hours in the office together. And sometimes I would stay overnight with my grandparents. I might stay for a couple of days, or I might just be dropped off in the morning and picked up in the evening, that kind of thing. I think it all depended. Now, I was the only child at the time because I was the first, and my mother hadn't even gotten pregnant again. So that date stamps the experience. It means that I was about 2 or 3 years old. My grandparents were lovely. I've got nothing to complain about. They took really good care of me, but they weren't my parents. And obviously this made a difference to me as a 2 or 3 year old child. And during hypnosis, I remembered for the first time in my life running out of my grandparents' house and crying and running up to the front gate all frantic and watching my parents' car drive away. And weirdly, that was a moment that I'd never remembered ever in my entire life. But it was the catalyst for so many little things that I've learnt over the years about myself without hypnosis. That was actually the only time I ever went to see a hypnotist. But she seemed to have unlocked something in me. And I will say nobody, I had feelings obviously of abandonment that had arisen from that childhood experience of running out to the gate. And so I guess I must have been feeling abandonment. I mean, nobody abandoned me. I was perfectly loved. But, young children process things differently and we don't have the same logical response to things. So anything little, like driving away in a car, can create a trauma inside a child at any time. In fact, this is not even just the case for humans. This can be the case for any living being. I mean, I can give you an example of my cat. Just from this weekend, my beautiful cat Smudgy got terribly traumatized this weekend because while she was under the covers of my bed sleeping all day, I moved a few things out of the garage and put them onto the back veranda. And so when she woke up, she went to go outside and the back veranda was different and now she's afraid of the veranda because it's different. And she didn't know how it happened. Suddenly there's something new in the veranda. And for about 3 days, she's been afraid to go outside. This is a kind of a trauma. It's very strange. So it happens to, you never know where it's going to come from when it comes to the other person or the other entity. But, we can't explain somebody else's trauma, not all the time anyway. So getting back to the point of being human, yes, that was the only time I'd ever had hypnosis, but I figured out very quickly that the secret to understanding the present is to go and look at the past. Go back to times in the past when you felt the way that you do about this aspect of yourself that you want to resolve, and keep going back until you find the earliest time, because that earliest time is probably the originating time for the trauma. And then step 4 is once you've identified something in your past that appears to have been the trigger for the trauma, and this might take a while for you to do, unless of course you have a hypnotist on tap, well then you just once you've identified that moment, just sit back and observe it. Play it in your mind over and over again, just for a little while, so that you can understand it from a present-day adult perspective. Try to, and I'm not asking you to re-traumatize yourself. I'm saying relive it as though you were an innocent bystander, an impartial observer who's watching from behind some glass or something, watching it from the outside of the circumstance. In my example of being a toddler and experiencing this trauma of running to the front gate and crying at my parents who were driving away in their car, I would imagine that I'm a lovely, kind person who happened to be walking past, and I see this upset child. I can see that the child is upset. I can see why they're upset. I'm observing that as a witness. And I want to be a hero who's going to save them from this moment of possible trauma. And this is the fun part of being able to deal with your shadow self. In my imagination, in my perspective of being a witness, anything is possible. I can have superpowers. I can do anything. So what I've decided I'm going to do in this moment is I'm going to rescue this child from possibly experiencing any trauma. I'm going to run really fast. I'm going to catch up to the car and I'm going to stop it with pure brute force. And I'm going to tell the mother and the father that their child is crying and they have to turn around and go back and get her, pick her up and take her out for ice cream or something like that. They need to quit their business, forget the whole thing and just take their daughter out to get ice cream or to go to the circus or something, or the park or anything. It doesn't even have to make any sense. It doesn't even have to be realistic. It just needs to be the perfect solution in the moment that will help to resolve the trauma and make everything okay again. I've actually replicated this for myself a variety of different ways over the years and relating to a variety of different aspects of myself. And so I'll give you another example that actually comes from when I was grown up. Because what it allows me to do is it allows me to observe my feelings at the time without those feelings ruling over me. Now, obviously, I'm not perfect and I'm never going to be perfect. And there's going to be new traumas, just like with everyone, that enter in and build my shadow. But because I'm willing to look at myself and, being human, I think it's just nice to be able to continuously recognize that we're all works in progress. None of us is perfect. And anyone who appears to be perfect, well, they probably have more dark shadows than anyone else in their reality than we can even imagine. But another example that that people on the Ellie Dreams Unundered channel might find familiar, because I've mentioned this a few times, and that's because it really did have an impact on me at the time, was I had an interaction with a college professor when I was still quite young. It was one of my first college experiences, and I had gone to great lengths to decide what my major was going to be. I traveled to a different country to do my university degree, and I was, just starting out in a foreign country. I didn't have a tremendous amount of self-assuredness because I was young, I was impressionable, and I probably still had some of those self-esteem issues. One day my professor called me aside and said he wanted to talk to me privately, and he initiated this, and actually he was an idiot. He said to me, I always call him an idiot because he was an idiot. I don't know why I took advice from him anyway, but he said to me he didn't think I was suited to my major, and I need to change my major because it isn't right for me. And me being kind of dumb, I go, oh, okay. And I went and I changed my major. And somehow that created a kind of a trauma in me. But it also, that trauma was something that I was able to work on and turn into a superpower in a way. And that's kind of the reason why I am bringing it up. My major was originally journalism, and I would have been a kick-ass journalist. I'm sorry, but I'm like a dog with a bone. I have insurmountable energy. I'm curious about everything, and I will not take no for an answer. I make the perfect journalist. And I clearly enjoy talking, I suppose, as well. And somehow I've ended up in front of the public anyway. But I ended up moving into this area of work that was soul-destroying and mind-numbing, and I really didn't like it. And I did it really well, but I didn't enjoy it. And so I kept gravitating towards where I ended up, which is right here, which is about as close to journalism as a person can get without being a journalist. Is I get to experiment with my intellect. I get to go out there and exercise my curiosity and find out lots of things and share the information with people. I get to defy the norm and be like a dog with a bone. And I get to do all of the things, research and everything, and writing and all the things that I really love. Because I kind of worked with that shadow element that had developed, that trauma that had developed. But in the process of doing what I thought was the right thing originally, which was following what this idiot had told me to do, I rebelled against it the whole time. And that was my shadow expressing itself, telling me that I'm not happy here. I'm not happy here. I need to go back to the thing that makes me happy. And so after lots of education, bachelor degree and master's degree, and I've got commendations for the things that I've done, and I've got lovely letters from very important people thanking me for what I've done here and there and everywhere, none of which was what was in my heart that I wanted to do. It was all, and I rebelled against it the whole time because my shadow was ruling that aspect of my life. I gave it all up in order to do what seems right. And that was me harnessing that shadow element and turning it into a positive. I'm now exactly where I should be. And I've harnessed what could have been just bad behavior, could have been viewed as bad behavior, into something really positive. And it's kind of one of those examples. Well, everyone has so many of those examples in their past. And it's the difference between living a happy life that gives you a sense of purpose and seems natural and true, and living a life that you feel you have to for whatever reason, and having those shadows linger inside you. So, and you don't need to be perfect. Just the fact that you're willing to look inside yourself is half of the journey to getting it right. These days, when I'm thinking about, for example, that college professor, if I ever think, oh gosh, I wasted so many years heading in the wrong direction, I really wish that I would have just punched him in the nose instead of listened to him. I just imagine myself punching him in the nose. Why not? It's not like I'm physically doing it, and nobody'd even know unless I told them, like I just have. And in a way, it allows me an opportunity to giggle at the scenario. I imagine myself going out there in that moment that caused me some kind of trauma. And he makes his suggestion, which I'm sure was perfectly, I don't know, he felt perfectly entitled to do that for whatever reason. And he made his suggestion, and instead of listening to him and saying, oh, okay, I just punched him in the nose and walked away. And every time I think that, it makes me smile. I can't help myself because I reckon he deserved it. I wouldn't do it in real life, but in my imagination, he's been punched in the nose many, many times. Anywho. But, I mentioned that those are 4 official steps that I've been finding all over the place when it comes to methods of shadow work and how to heal the shadow self and harness it and integrate it into your life. But I also believe that there's a 5th step or a 5th aspect that's really important that often isn't addressed. And I think it makes all the difference. And that 5th step is kind of unofficial. It relates to self-compassion. You need to be really kind to yourself. If you identify, and you've gone through these 4 steps, and you've identified that there's something that you need to deal with, in an aspect of yourself that you need to deal with, and you've identified what it is, and you invite it in for a discussion, and then you go back in time and you witness it again and again, and then you kind of provide this resolution to it in some way. That's great. But throughout those steps, you're very likely to encounter a risk of re-traumatizing yourself if you push yourself too hard. And so I think one of the best things is step 5, which is to be kind to yourself and to let it go as soon as you think that it's getting a bit out of control. If you can't make it work in the moment, then shadow work can be really challenging, and it's a lifelong thing. But it requires you to look at aspects of yourself that you're naturally trying to avoid, which means if you ever feel you're at the point during your self-examination that it's getting a bit overwhelming and that you risk re-traumatizing yourself if you continue, then just let it go for a while, just for a few hours or a few days or a few weeks, because there really is no hurry. Being in the process of working on your shadow self means that you're getting there. And each time you return to try again and you observe as a witness, that trauma becomes less traumatic. So it will come with time. The important thing, though, is to observe it rather than to relive it. If you relive the trauma and allow yourself to be back where you were then, and experiencing all those emotions again as though they're happening to you again, then you're compounding the pain and the fear that you experienced. But if you stand on the outside and imagine yourself being a third-party witness, then you can see it happening, but it's not happening to you anymore. And I think that makes all the difference. In my scenario of being a toddler, I wasn't the toddler crying as I was coming back to observe. I was an adult who happened to be walking past, who witnessed the toddler crying, and who also happened to have superhuman powers. By putting yourself in witness mode and observing rather than reliving, then you have this aspect of detachment that puts you in control of that shadow rather than the shadow being able to control you. So there are many ways to explore the shadow self for the purposes of identifying shadow aspects and healing through the integration of the shadow as a positive expression and energy output. The world of psychology has a list of recommended types of actions, things like journaling and meditation and therapy. But you know what? I'm not a psychologist. I'm a tarot card reader. And I believe that tarot is also a form of meditation and reflection, just like journaling is. And so when you trust in the language of tarot, like I do, this is something that you can use or delve into to deeply examine yourself and work on yourself in lots of different ways. And yes, I do believe that tarot is a form of meditation and reflection. Have you ever noticed there are so many different forms of meditation? I've mentioned this before. My mother loves to chop up vegetables into tiny little pieces for recipes. I think it's because her mind shuts down and she goes into like the zone as she's doing that. And that's a form of meditation. Well, when I'm reading tarot, that's kind of the response that I'm getting. My mind, it's a bit more difficult when I'm dealing with camera work and everything like that as a social media person. But generally, I've figured out how to master that as well. People who watch me regularly will know that I'm kind of in some kind of a zone when I'm doing particularly a full spread. I'm deeply involved in the moment, but I'm observing it. I'm not living it. And it's a form of meditation and reflection. Tarot is a wonderful way to kind of meditate in a way that is highly conscious and very aware and can go into scenarios, but almost has that witness process. Actually, it kind of does have that witness process in it as well. So tarot can be used as a way to explore aspects of self, to help you to find emotional blockages, patterns of negative behavior, past life events, karmic events, and it also acts as a form of therapy. It can help you to learn about yourself and accept yourself for all of the things that you are. And you really don't need to be, or you don't need a tarot card reader to do this for you. And you don't even really need to be a highly experienced tarot card reader to do it for yourself. If you have some kind of a resource with you that helps you to understand the meaning of the cards, whether it's a book or whether it's even the cards that have the definitions written on them or anything, then you have a framework that you can work from. If you have a spread of some kind, like for example, I use the 10 card spread, which is my own spread, then you know what the positions are. And of course, if you've been watching the channel, you probably would know that I have set positions for each of the cards. They always refer to the same aspects of life, regardless of which card it is. Then you have a framework that you can work with to be able to use tarot as a method to heal yourself. I've been using the same cards for somewhere between 35 and 40 years. By now, I'd say it is. And I don't do tarot readings on myself anymore, but I used to back when I was learning. I did it for quite a few years. I would do readings for myself. These days, I don't. Because I don't, lots of different reasons, but one of them is that I just don't. I have other simpler, quicker ways that I kind of am introspective now. But when I did use tarot to be able to work on hidden aspects of myself, such as this shadow work, I would read on matters pertaining to how I feel, the people that I know, family members, groups of friends, co-workers, or even people I had met recently, had interactions with, that I had a vibe about or wasn't sure about. I mean, all kinds of things. And using tarot, particularly when it came to my full reading, helped me to understand myself tremendously. On the Ellie Dreams and Under channel, I have a few playlists for people who might want to be able to see how tarot readings can help us to understand ourselves actually, or other people. I've got a playlist that's called Personal Readings, and you'll see the shadow work at play in that playlist. There have been, I choose the personal readings that I do on the Ellie channel really carefully. It has to be a topic it has to be a reading that can be anonymized so that the person's identity is not disclosed, but it also has to be a topic that will be felt or experienced by many people who are watching, because I want it to be relevant to people. I want people to resonate with that reading. And it's funny how, regardless of the personal reading that I've done that appear in that personal readings playlist, invariably there have been people who've been watching who are unrelated to the circumstances who've commented and said, oh my gosh, this reading wasn't about me, but I felt like it was about me. And that's the sign of a really good shadow reading, because when you do a good shadow reading, you're picking up on aspects of the human condition that are shared by many people, by pretty much everyone who has experienced trauma in that regard. And so if you want to take a look at examples of shadow work, you'll see it in that reading, and also in the Gabby Petito example as well. Traumas are not really that imaginative. There's a certain set type of trauma that takes place. You've got things like abandonment, abuse, neglect, and these are all things that spread throughout the humanity. And so people will be experiencing very similar types of things. It's almost like there's a formula to it. And I think perhaps that's because we're all aspects of the same single soul anyway. So it stands to reason that we're often going to feel very similar things as a result of our experiences. So a really good tarot reading helps to identify and examine a person's soul, whether it be the good aspects, the bad, or the ugly. You know, we are, of course, it's important for us to remember in the context of the shadow self, that regardless of who we are, each of us is made up of positive and negative aspects. We're each positive and negative, light and dark, good and, well, not so good, right? It's in all of our makeup. And once we recognize that about ourselves and accept it and learn how to integrate both the light and the dark, the good and the bad, into a positive expression, then we get control of our shadow and we have it working for us instead of against us. And in that way, your shadow self can actually become a really powerful force for good. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of people who are testimony to the fact that this is the case. The first person is the British performer David Bowie. David Bowie has openly discussed the role of his shadow self in his success as a performer. Throughout his life, David has spoken about his struggles with self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy. He's explained that how he channeled these feelings into his work, using his shadow self as a driving force behind his creativity and his relentless work ethic. He was able to confront the darker aspects of himself and integrate them into positive expressions that contributed really well to his success as an artist. Oprah Winfrey is another example. Oprah has spoken at length over the years about how she suffered from self-esteem issues and feelings of inadequacy, just like David Bowie. She credits these challenges as being key motivators in her journey to success by confronting and overcoming her shadow self. Oprah was able, through her shadow work, to be able to build a media empire and become one of the most influential women in the world. I mean, whether you like Oprah or not, because these days, everyone is an opportunity to express division and disagreement. But anyway, whether you like her or not, Oprah's story is a real demonstration of how embracing and integrating the darker aspects of self can lead to personal and professional growth. And then finally, I think another really powerful example to add to this list is Carl Jung himself. Yes, Carl Jung was a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist, and he was the originator of the concept of the shadow self. But that was because he used himself as a guinea pig in this regard. Carl Jung credited his own success in his profound contributions to psychology, to his deep understanding and acceptance of his own shadow self. And his work in that field has subsequently influenced many fields of working, from psychology to spirituality, and his ideas continue to resonate with millions of people all over the world who are seeking to understand the complexities of the human psyche. But one thing about shadow work and the premise behind integrating your shadow self into positive creative expressions of self is that you need to also find ways at the same time to break free from negative societal influences that keep you in the cycle of your shadow controlling you rather than you controlling your shadow. And the world these days, unfortunately, is filled with negative messaging. And some of that negative messaging is masquerading as positive messaging. So we have to be truly vigilant these days. Being able to recognize and challenge negative aspects of the social environment is really important. Try not to get sucked into the vortex of fear or hatred towards others. Also, other things like jealousy, envy, any of those influences that cause you to separate yourself from the collective. Instead, think about how you can integrate yourself in ways that are healthy and truthful expressions of yourself. You don't have to be the same as everyone else. You just need to be you. And also surround yourself with an environment of support that allows you to experience continuous personal growth. And in particular, that personal growth, that continuous personal growth is important, and that's often overlooked. Being supported is great, but if you're being supported in a status quo dogma type of environment, and if you're being prevented from or discouraged from changing and growing in the way that's natural for you or adapting to your new growth in certain ways, that's a form of suppression. And so it kind of is counteractive to the support that you might be feeling. This is something that happens a lot, is people find a supportive environment and then they become stifled by that supportive environment because the environment itself is dogmatic and doesn't want to change. To truly support a person is to allow them to be themselves, regardless of what that is. But in turn, the person themselves needs to be their true self. So anyway, I thought that it might be nice to provide an example of a tarot card reading that I could do that was dedicated to examining the shadow self. And so I put a call out to the Ellie Dreams Down Under community on YouTube and asked them to suggest a person that we could look at using tarot. And the name Mother Teresa came up. I thought that was a wonderful example. The Mother Teresa suggestion is a great suggestion. And so I've done a shadow work reading from Mother Teresa that was really complex and quite a good example of how tarot can assist in shadow work. In addition to the other things that I'm linking on today's episode, I'm also going to provide a link to that particular video in the description for today's show. And that includes the Gabby Petito thing and also the personal readings playlist, so that people can see different types of shadow work tarot readings, so that you can actually see how easy it is to be able to step inside yourself. And I'm just using tarot as an example, to be able to examine and resolve aspects of yourself that were otherwise avoided or feared. I'd also love to hear from people if you're listening or watching in a forum where you can comment, who have got stories to tell about their experiences with shadow work and the examination of their shadow self. There's no need for you to provide any more information than is necessary, but if you do have experience working on the inner darkness within you and finding ways to channel it in positive ways, I would love to see those comments. And I think people can benefit from seeing others share their experiences in that regard, because it's really wonderful to know and acknowledge everything about yourself. And having done that, to also realize that having a darker side, it doesn't make you a bad person. There is duality in everything in life. Light only exists because it's a contrast to the darkness, and good only exists because it's a contrast to evil. And love is proof of our ability to see things like fear and hate and dark and evil, but to choose to reject them in favor of the light. Not to run away from them, but to acknowledge them and transform them into a healthy expression of light. It might even be the reason why we're here. Who knows? So maybe today's episode has inspired just one person to finally lift the covers of whatever it is that they have been running away from their whole life, gently and kindly examining their own shadow self and finding ways to turn their darkness into a powerful guiding light. My name is Ellie, and you can find me on the Ellie Dreams Down Under channel on YouTube. I should say that everything I talk about on this show is a product of my own experiences, the research that I've conducted, and from time to time it may also be a product of other people's viewpoints. I'm not necessarily an expert on anything that I'm discussing, but I am curious about everything in life. And I hope that this show encourages you to also enjoy and embark on your own journey of curiosity. Thanks to everyone who is listening today on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you'd like to become a member of the KGRA viewership family and hang out with like-minded watchers, experiencers, spiritualists and weirdos like me, then go to live.kgradb.com and enter promo code Ellie.